My name's Tracey Lane. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank. I manage a team here who support the Ministry of Planning in the Kenya government to do analysis of where the government's been spending its money. The motivation is how to improve service delivery within a sustainable financing plan. So I started working with the government in 2009, and the challenges started very early on, how to analyze where you were spending your money when the Ministry of Planning didn't actually have the data on spending allocations. So 2009 we wrote letters, or the Permanent Secretary of Planning wrote letters, I should say, to the National Audit Office to get the information on where the money was going. And that's when we started to get digital CD versions of these reports. So this is 1 year.
Right.
And we have it for 10 years. And each ministry has two votes, two recurrent and a development vote, which would appear as two files on a CD.
And it would be that size.
And so we had basically 40, 50 ministries, 100 votes per year for 10 years. And we combined all of that into one data set. So getting into the data was all through that sort of public expenditure lens very early on. And we had intended that the information be released to the public, but we hadn't at that stage come across an open data, open government initiative. So it was all about releasing to the public on the Ministry of Planning's website in tables and sort of Excel downloadable attachments. So the data came on the CDs, and they were access files, and they were forms. So in fact, when you opened up the file, you just saw a summary form on the front of the file. And what you had to do was hit F11 to get the underlying data. And then we would export it to Excel from there, and we just compiled and compiled until we had a central government comprehensive data set, which had about 500,000 lines of Excel data. And we've added since then the local authority spending, the CDF spending, so that you have both central and subnational spending in one place. We had been busy working on this with the expectation that it would be made public somewhere, but without getting real traction in that dialogue. The local authority data was coming off reports, so here it was just paper copies. We were scanning them and then converting them using a software to convert the data into Excel and adding them in. So over these 6 months, as we were trying to build the comprehensive data set, we were hoping that this was getting traction in the Ministry of Planning. Meanwhile, we were aware that there was a separate conversation going on with PS and Demo at the ICT Ministry, and through that connection, through my colleagues who were meeting him and demonstrating some of the data that we had, I became involved. So there was a brief where we basically showed him the kind of information that we had, which wasn't just about spending, because we were also looking at whether or not the spending does anything in terms of service delivery. We also had information about where the schools were. We had information about whether or not people had access to, were basically putting their children in school. And we were showing this in a way that had a visualization that's immediately attractive. You can see, underneath what the poverty rates are, and then you can see the GIS coded map of where the schools are, and you can sort of click on the school and get a pop out as to what the pupil-teacher ratios are, for example. So that was the start of many 7 a.m. meetings for the next couple of months. I came in sort of at the end of a conversation about the willingness to do this, and I think the conversation kind of tipped the balance that there was something that could be done, because what had been missing in all of this was who had the information, where was the data. And PS and Demo and I immediately hit it off, because we were both trying to get access to similar information stores, and had both gone through the same process of standing outside the government printer asking for district development plans that were no longer in print, and we had this shared frustration of being able to get hold of the information. So he immediately saw the value in what we had been doing in digitalizing what we had done to date. And I think there came the willingness that basically, yes, we were going to do this. The question was when, and the final tipping point really wasn't just the data that we had, it was the result of asking for the census data from KNBS. So when we had brought the Ministry of Planning and Ministry of ICT together over lunch. So PS Planning, PS Assembly, our counterpart in the Public Expenditure Review, met with PS and Demo over lunch. And PS and Demo said, I want to get the census data, the 2009 census data, to add to this, this volume of information that we've been gathering. And that finally ended up with the census tables coming on CD one late Friday evening, that was. So I think it was the 8th of June. So 1 month before launch. And that arrived from KNBS. And then I think that was the point at which we said, now we have enough stock of data that we would definitely move forward. And PS and Demo said, okay, let's do it. When should we do it? And we all agreed that a close, tight time frame would be better, because the momentum had been building for 6 months and we just kind of wanted to get the thing done very quickly. So once we got the census tables, that's the point at which our team became very frantically involved, because we'd set a tight time frame with only 1 month. The first date was 3 weeks, I think, from the time that we got that data. All the public expenditure data, of course, we've been curating for years, so 2 years, so that was fairly well cooked. Now, the census tables we got for the first time only 3 weeks before launch. And so we pulled in a number of people from different teams in the bank who've been working on other projects, but were able to be released from sort of longer term projects to work on this as a priority. So we put together 3 or 4 people who could curate data, and we just started. And we had a whiteboard, we had a list of all the data sources, and one by one we went through them and curated them. When they were ready, we set them aside ready for upload to the site. So there was long nights to get all of this ready. We prioritized certain areas where we thought there was more demand, so health and education data. And whilst wandering around the floors of the bank, I also would always ask, well, do you have any information sitting on your files already that's already publicly available, but in hard copy? And that's when we got hold of the Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey data. So all of the tables exist in the report form, but in fact they were also sitting in Excel form on some of the PCs here. So we'd been looking at them. The data's quite old, it's from 2005-06. So not the raw data, but we also now had the opportunity to curate these data sets and upload these data sets too. And then we decided we would also double our workload, because all of the old data is obviously in district form. So the census data is using the 158 districts. The KIBIS data is using the 2005 districts, 58 districts. And we decided that counties was obviously the lens through which most people would want to look. So we added to the workload that for each data set, we would create the county level equivalent, which basically means taking the percentages, working back to the absolutes, recalculating new percentages by putting the absolutes of the districts into a county, which means you need to have a good map of districts to county. And that's one of the problems that we face. So we got a bridging table from KNBS with, here are the districts, here are the counties, and here are the problematic ones where it could be 50-50, it might not be 50-50, you need to make a judgment call. And we worked with that, and we curated all these county data sets, and at some point just before launch, there was somebody noticed that in fact one of the districts had been mapped to the wrong county, and we had to recurate for at least 2 of those. So we put it back into the right county and took it out of the wrong county, and then re-uploaded all of those tables. So that kind of doubled the workload, but all for the point of making it more interesting and contemporary for the user. The first thing is you have to have some sense as to who wants the information and why, because there's a long list of possible data sources that you can put out. But what is it that people are really going to be interested in? What do they really want to see? And then you need to prioritize around what you think is going to get the most traction and the biggest hits. And our sense was that people want to know where their money goes. And there's a lot of websites around the world that says, show me the money, and where did that go? So we thought that was a big priority. And then we thought poverty was the other one, that people would really want to know, how does my area relate to the next area? So poverty, and then access to services. Do you have access to water? Does the neighbor have access to water? Access to sanitation, quality of housing materials, things that are about well-being and living standards. And then I think the population data was one that was actually pretty interesting. when you look at the density of population in Kenya, you realize the challenge of delivering services in some areas. So 20% of the population live in the most densely populated areas, occupy only 0.4% of the land. At the other end, 20% of the population in the most sparsely populated areas occupy 88% of the land. So when you're dealing with counties with population densities of less than 50 people per square kilometre, you can start to understand some of the problems that we were trying to get to, which is how do you translate money into services for the biggest part of the population. So bringing those together helped. So I think you need to work about what's your storyline, what's your priority, and then one of the questions about the portal itself. What is it how does the data need to look that is the most easy for it to be uploaded on a regular basis? And we dealt with a lot of one-off data sets. The 2009 data set was not one where we were doing comparison with 1999 or 1989. But if you have data sets where you're uploading it on a much more frequent basis, you need to set it up to begin with so that all you're going to do is add rows of data on the bottom. So I think working out how the portal works, in the case of the Socrata that we are using for Cody, you basically can add rows of data very easily. But if you want to add columns of data, you have to download the data set that you put up there and reload it again. And that kind of destroys all your analytics because you've taken a data set down and you've lost how many views it's had along the way. So working out what it is that the citizen is going to be able to export and what the supplier needs to upload on a more regular basis from the beginnings. It's a chicken and egg situation. If you don't have the data available, then people will never become savvy with the data and work out what it means. So you have to at least put the supply up before you can generate the demand. And for me, at least, the Cody's side isn't about getting the 99th percentile person to access the data and understand what it means. It's about getting a core group of people who can use it for research, who can use it for media and stories, who are basically creating the space and the stories for citizens to understand where their taxpayers' money is going. Why am I not getting the services that I thought I was going to get? I mean, maybe there's valid reasons for it. And it changes the incentives of everybody involved, right? It changes the incentives of the people who are working on a day-to-day basis to know that at the end of the day, that audit number that says, you got allocated 2.5 million shillings, it's going to show up somewhere. And if you've got a sign on the road that says your project only costs 1 million shillings, somebody can find that number and compare the two. And that's going to change the incentive of the guy who's putting the sign to be more honest about how much money went into the project. So I think it's about shifting incentives. So getting the census data was a very memorable moment. That was the point at which we knew we were going to go forward. And that was quickly followed by the next one where PS and Demo said, so should I get the president to launch? And we said, well, yes, of course, to get the president to launch. And so on the next meeting, which was again the next day, he said, so I've got the president and I've lined it up and it's going to happen on the 28th of June, which was the original date. And so at that point you had the data, you had somebody who was willing to take the political will, and you could bypass a number of internal bureaucracies if you've got the president behind you launching it. And I think that was kind of key. If you don't have this somebody, the political will, the champion in PS and Demo, backed by somebody who is also going to make everybody else who becomes a little cautious along the way, the closer you get to launch date, more and more people get nervous about what's happening. Having that makes a big difference. And then you have the Constitution, right? This freedom of information is enshrined in the Constitution. Public servants have a right to give the information that citizens need to them. And this is just a starting point. I was definitely very stressed in the run-up to launch, not to have a wrong number anywhere. And we had calculated county poverty rates on the basis of districts, and districts don't fit neatly into counties. And the day before, we had this sudden realization that we could do it on the basis of constituencies, because constituencies do fit more neatly into counties. So overnight, the day before the launch, we recalculated all the county poverty numbers and uploaded them 2 hours before the president went and into KICC and hit the button, because we didn't want to have any wrong number, and we didn't want anybody to be able to, to suggest that there was a better way of putting these county estimates together. So yes, we were very, very nervous. And we were very relieved at the end of the first week not to have too many too many errors in the data. I mean, we find them all the time, but it's nothing major so far. To some extent, I have trouble talking about that because he came with astonishing news to a task force meeting, which I didn't attend, because we were so working round the clock to make sure that the data was up there that I sent my apologies and said it's much better that we get the data done. So I didn't hear about it until day before the launch, and so a lot of the wobble had happened earlier, and I had not been aware of it. So at the press conference before the launch, all the mutterings after that, I heard about how this may not have happened literally only 24 hours ago. And my response was, I'm so glad I did not know that, because at that point I had people working 24 hours around the clock to finalize the data. So I'm glad that basically I came in having not heard all of the detail along the way of how it almost didn't happen.
Would you do this again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're still supporting very much and making sure that we support both the KNBS, the statisticians involved, and the ICT board to make sure that the visualizations look good, that if we spot wrong numbers, that's updated. So absolutely. I think the World Bank has a coordinating role to play. I mean, we have various clients in various ministries, many of whom have technocrats who want to see this. We have ongoing conversations at the moment in the education ministry about doing a Check My School type website, so with more information at the school level. Not just at the moment, we have pupils and teachers dating from 2007, so it's not up-to-date information. And that whole conversation's spun out of open data. It's going to spin off a whole new area of work which will go on the open data site, and has solved this coordination problem where the Examinations Council has a data set, Teacher Service Commission has a data set, Ministry of Education has 2 data sets, and they can identify schools, but they can't identify a school in their data set in somebody else's data set. So solving this coordination problem and getting meaningful information out to the public, I think that's a very key role for the World Bank to support. One of the lessons learned is you can't do reforms without resources. Voluntary work only lasts so long. So I think the big push will come once we have proper funding in place, and the World Bank is going to the board in March with an additional financing request with somewhere around $7 million to support the Open Data Initiative. So here we can have more institutionalization both on the supply side, helping those that were supposed to have done some of this curation to take it forward on a much more regular basis, and on the demand side, because we know that we need to bring people's awareness to what's there, help them find information, as you said, to navigate the data, to work out what it means, and then also to use Kenya's great example to demonstrate to the rest of the region how this can be done, and how this is actually a reasonably easy, if you've got the right political will, reform to undertake. I never really understood the argument. There's not a lot of in the information that I know that's available that I can see as being secretive, betraying security issues, and I haven't seen a good case for that argument, basically, with what's been released, that it's a security issue, that we are somehow releasing information to the state's enemies. And I think it's such a small argument to say that potentially somebody wants to know where the health facilities are for the reasons of, I don't know, a terrorist attack, that it doesn't, it pales into insignificance against the argument that 40 million people need to know where the health facilities are, and you can't release the data to 40 million people without the 1 or 2 who are potentially a threat. And then just because they know where it is, I mean, that's also something that you can find out. A lot of the information that's being made available, it's actually just being made available more easily. It's not like it's being made available for the first time. It's actually just making it available in a low-cost way for people to gain access to. And I think the argument that it's more useful to the citizen outweighs those concerns. For me, I think it's one of the most exciting things that I've done. And so I don't know if it did anything to my career long term, but it definitely got me much more interested in governance and freedom of information, transparency. Shifted my focus probably a lot more from some of the macroeconomic analysis that we do. It's a little bit more dry and dull, and this is a lot more fun.